Commander Deho stood on the bridge of his massive warship and looked at the small blue planet below. Earth looked so peaceful and quiet, spinning slowly in space. His officers Hyunwoo and Bo-Ram were checking their weapons and shields while the ship moved closer to the human world. The Veltharian Empire had been conquering planets for 300 years, and they had never lost a single battle. Deho smiled as he watched the tiny human satellites floating around Earth like toys. The humans had such simple technology compared to his people. Their cities were made of basic metal and concrete. Their flying machines could barely leave their atmosphere. Their weapons still used old chemical explosives instead of energy beams. The intelligence report said humans had only learned to split atoms recently and had never traveled past their own moon. The Veltharian ships were like floating cities filled with the most advanced technology in the galaxy. Their energy weapons could turn entire mountains into dust in seconds. Their shields could stop nuclear bombs without even flickering. Their armor was made from materials that could survive inside stars. Deho had conquered 17 different star systems, and each victory had been easier than the last. But today something felt different as the first landing pods shot down toward Earth's surface. Lieutenant Hae-Won was chosen to be the first Veltharian to step on human soil. Her boots touched the green grass, and immediately she fell to her knees, gasping for air. Her fellow soldiers rushed to help, but they started feeling sick too. The gravity felt much heavier than their computers had calculated. The air was thick and hard to breathe, even through their advanced suits. Private Jinho tried to move a fallen tree branch that was blocking their landing site. Back on his home planet, his enhanced strength could lift objects weighing several tons. Here on Earth, this simple piece of wood felt impossibly heavy. His muscles strained and he could barely budge it. Panic spread through the landing party as they realized something was very wrong with this planet. Their communication devices started making strange noises filled with interference they had never heard before. The readings on their instruments were going crazy, showing numbers that made no sense. Energy levels were fluctuating wildly, and their targeting systems couldn't lock onto anything properly. The advanced technology that had made them masters of the galaxy was suddenly acting like broken toys. More landing pods crashed into the Earth, and every single team reported the same problems. Soldiers who could normally run for hours without getting tired were exhausted after walking just a few minutes. Weapons that could melt through starship hulls were barely scratching rocks and trees. Their medical scanners couldn't identify any of the local plant or animal life forms. Sergeant Kyung-soo tried to contact the main ship, but the radio signals were being blocked by something in Earth's atmosphere. The planet seemed to be actively fighting against their technology in ways that shouldn't be possible. Every system was working at reduced efficiency, and some equipment was failing completely. The worst part was the feeling that someone was watching them. The forests were too quiet and the animals seemed to be hiding. There were no humans visible anywhere, but the Veltharians could sense they were being observed. Hidden cameras were recording their every move and transmitting the information to unknown locations. As the sun set on their first day on Earth, the Veltharian soldiers huddled in their camps trying to make sense of what was happening. Their mighty invasion force felt weak and vulnerable for the first time in centuries. The planet they had expected to conquer in hours was somehow making them feel like frightened children. Lost in the dark, Commander Deho received reports from all the landing sites, and each one was worse than the last. His soldiers were struggling with basic tasks that should have been simple. Their equipment was malfunctioning in ways their engineers had never seen before. Earth was not the easy conquest they had planned for. Something about this blue planet was fundamentally different from every other world they had encountered. The Veltharians had come to Earth expecting to find primitive humans cowering in fear. Instead, they found a world that seemed designed to make advanced civilizations weak and helpless, while something unknown watched them struggle in the growing darkness. Captain Soo-jin watched her sensor screens in growing alarm as emergency signals poured in from the surface. Every landing party was reporting equipment failures and reduced combat effectiveness. But even more disturbing were the energy signatures that were starting to appear all over Earth. Underground facilities that hadn't shown up on their initial scans were suddenly powering up across the entire planet. The humans had been hiding something enormous beneath their seemingly simple civilization. Massive installations were coming online in perfect coordination, as if following a pre-planned schedule. Power levels that matched some of their own military bases were suddenly active under human cities, mountains, and even ocean floors. On the ground, Sergeant Kyung-soo was setting up a perimeter around his crash site when human soldiers appeared out of nowhere. These weren't the weak, soft creatures their intelligence reports had described. Human soldiers moved with deadly purpose and perfect coordination that seemed impossible for such a young species. Their uniforms were simple, but their tactics were flawless. Every human movement was calculated and precise. They advanced using cover and concealment techniques that would have impressed veteran Veltharian commanders. Their communication was done with hand signals that allowed them to coordinate complex maneuvers without making any sound. These humans fought like they had been preparing for this exact battle for their entire lives. Private Yoonji raised her plasma rifle and fired at a human patrol. The weapon that could melt through starship armor barely left scorch marks on the human's simple protective gear. Meanwhile, human bullets, which were just metal projectiles fired by chemical explosions, were somehow punching through Veltharian energy shields, like they weren't even there. The impossible was happening right before their eyes. Technology that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was being defeated by weapons that belonged in a museum. Human rifles that used gunpowder were more effective than energy beams that could vaporize steel. Human body armor made of fabric and ceramic was stopping plasma bolts that could pierce tank armor communications. Officer Young-ho managed to intercept human military transmissions, and what he heard made his blood run cold. The humans weren't panicking or running in terror like every other species had done during Veltharian invasions. Instead, they were calmly coordinating a global defense network with the efficiency of a machine-human radio chatter revealed detailed knowledge of Veltharian ship, designs, weapon capabilities, and tactical doctrines. Somehow these primitive humans had studied their enemies and prepared specific countermeasures for everything. They knew exactly what kind of shields the invaders used and had developed ammunition designed to penetrate them. They understood Veltharian combat psychology and were using it against them. The most shocking discovery was that the humans weren't surprised by the invasion at all. Their communications showed they had been expecting this attack and had been preparing for it for a very long time. Military units were moving to predetermined positions following battle plans that had been created years in advance. Every human knew exactly what to do and where to go. Lieutenant Haiwan watched in amazement as human civilians continued their normal daily activities, even as starships battled overhead. Children walked to school while energy beams crossed the sky. Farmers kept working in their fields while explosions echoed in the distance. Store owners sold food and supplies to customers as if alien invasion was just another ordinary day. The humans weren't just unafraid of the Veltharian military might. They seemed completely immune to intimidation. 3 centuries of conquest had been built on fear and overwhelming force, but these Earth dwellers treated the most powerful military in the galaxy like a minor inconvenience. Their entire species appeared to be naturally resistant to the psychological warfare that had broken every other civilization. As night fell on the second day of invasion, it became clear that something had gone terribly wrong with what should have been a routine conquest. The Veltharians found themselves fighting an enemy that knew them better than they knew themselves. Earth wasn't just another planet to be conquered. It was a trap that had been waiting for them to walk into it. Dr. Sunwoo analyzed atmospheric samples from Earth's surface and made a discovery that filled him with dread. The planet's environment wasn't just different from other worlds, it was actively hostile to advanced technology in ways that defied all known science. Earth's magnetic field created interference patterns that disrupted sophisticated electronics. The atmospheric composition contained trace elements that degraded energy-based weapons over time, but the most terrifying realization was that the humans weren't just surviving in this hostile environment, they were thriving because of it. Every aspect of Earth's harsh conditions had made humanity stronger and more dangerous than any species the Veltharians had ever encountered. Engineer Mi Young discovered that Earth's heavy gravity had given humans incredible physical endurance and bone density that made them nearly unbreakable. The aggressive bacteria and viruses that filled their world had created immune systems that could resist Veltharian biological weapons. The planet's violent weather patterns had taught humans to work together and adapt quickly to any situation. The radiation from Earth's sun was different too. It had given humans a natural resistance to energy weapons while making their own simple, projectile weapons more effective. Their cellular structure was optimized for this exact environment, which meant everything the Veltharians brought to Earth worked poorly, while everything human worked perfectly. Lieutenant Sang-min watched human farmers continue working in their fields even as starships battled directly overhead. Children played games in the streets while energy beams lit up the sky. Elderly humans sat on porches drinking tea while explosions echoed from nearby battlefields. The entire human population seemed completely unafraid of danger. These humans hadn't evolved courage. They had evolved beyond fear itself. Their planet was so dangerous that alien invasion was just another daily challenge to overcome. Every human had been shaped by a world that tried to kill them from the moment they were born. They had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, massive storms, and extinction events that would have wiped out any other species. Analyst Hyojin compiled intelligence reports that revealed the horrifying truth about what Earth really was. This wasn't just another planet. With primitive life forms, it was a cosmic anomaly that had produced the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Earth was essentially a training ground that had spent millions of years creating the perfect warriors. Every aspect of human evolution had been guided by their planet's attempts to destroy them. The survivors became stronger, faster, smarter, and more adaptable with each generation. Natural selection had eliminated weakness and fear while promoting aggression, cooperation, and innovative thinking. Humanity was the end result of a planet that specialized in creating apex predators. The weather on Earth was more violent than on most worlds, but humans had learned to predict and control it to some degree. They could trigger storms, redirect rivers, and even cause earthquakes when necessary. Their entire civilization was built around surviving impossible odds and using their environment as a weapon against enemies. Human technology looked primitive because they had learned that simple, reliable systems worked better than complex ones in dangerous situations. Their weapons used basic physics because basic physics worked the same way every time. Their communication systems were analog because analog signals couldn't be hacked or jammed easily. The Veltharians had spent centuries conquering civilizations that had evolved on peaceful garden worlds where cooperation and logic were valued above all else. Earth had produced a species where every individual was essentially a one-person army, trained from birth to fight, survive, and win against impossible odds. The invasion force hadn't attacked a primitive world. They had walked into the territory of the galaxy's ultimate predators. General Taemin received increasingly desperate reports from ground forces as human counterattacks intensified across the globe. What had begun as routine pacification operations had become a nightmare of guerrilla warfare that his troops were completely unprepared for. Humans appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating effectiveness, and then vanished into terrain that seemed specifically designed to hide them. Every forest, every mountain, every city street had become a potential ambush site. The humans fought like they knew every inch of their world on a personal level because they did. Each human had grown up exploring hiking, camping, and playing in the same environment they were now using to hunt Veltharian soldiers. Their entire childhood had been preparation for this exact type of warfare. Strike Team Leader Hyojin led a squad to capture what intelligence suggested was a major human command center. Instead, they found an elementary school where human children were continuing their education, despite the ongoing invasion. But these weren't ordinary lessons that would be found in schools on civilized worlds. The children were learning mathematics by calculating projectile trajectories and explosive yields. They studied chemistry by mixing compounds that could dissolve Veltharian armor plating. Their history classes focused on previous defensive wars and successful resistance strategies used by smaller forces against larger enemies. Every human child was receiving military training disguised as normal education. Physical education involved obstacle courses that would challenge trained soldiers. Art class included lessons on camouflage and concealment techniques. Science experiments taught students how to build communication devices and simple weapons from common household materials. Even their literature classes focused on stories about ordinary people, overcoming impossible odds through courage and determination. Pilot Du Hyun found his advanced fighter craft repeatedly outmaneuvered by primitive human aircraft that shouldn't have been able to compete with Veltharian technology. Human pilots flew with a reckless creativity that no Veltharian could match because they had been trained to think outside normal parameters of safe operation. The human pilots used their aircraft in ways that violated every principle of aerodynamic engineering, performing maneuvers that should have torn their machines apart or killed them from the stress forces. Instead, they somehow pushed their primitive fighters beyond all reasonable limits and made them perform like advanced combat vessels. It became clear that humans had evolved beyond the normal limitations that restricted other species. Their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory made them completely unpredictable as opponents. They would use tactics that guaranteed their own destruction if it meant taking enemy forces with them. No computer could calculate responses. To an enemy that defied logic and self-preservation, Reconnaissance Officer J. Young made the most disturbing discovery of all, when he managed to decode human military communications. The humans had been deliberately broadcasting false information about their technological capabilities for decades. Everything the Veltharians knew about Earth had been carefully crafted. Deception. Earth's primitive appearance had been an elaborate lie designed to make potential invaders underestimate human capabilities. The simple metal cities hid underground manufacturing facilities that could produce weapons and equipment at impossible speeds. The crude flying machines were decoys, while the real human aircraft were hidden in secret bases. The humans hadn't been caught off guard by the invasion. They had been preparing for it, while carefully making themselves appear weak and vulnerable. Every aspect of First Contact had been orchestrated to draw the Veltharians into a carefully planned trap. The primitive radio signals had been bait designed to attract exactly this type of military response. Intelligence reports revealed that humans had been monitoring Veltharian communications for over 2 centuries. They knew about every battle, every conquest, and every tactical doctrine used by the Empire. Earth had spent generations analyzing their future enemies and developing specific countermeasures for everything the invasion force might bring. The realization struck the Veltharian command structure like a physical blow. They weren't conquering a primitive world, they were being systematically destroyed by an enemy that had been hunting them for longer than most of their soldiers had been alive. The prey had become the predator, and the trap was closing around them with deadly precision. Admiral Wanshik watched his mighty invasion fleet being systematically destroyed by an enemy he had completely underestimated. The humans had turned their entire planet into a weapon system designed specifically to eliminate advanced military forces. They used everything from weather patterns to seismic activity as tools of warfare. Human tactics defied every principle of civilized combat that existed in the galaxy. They triggered volcanic eruptions to destroy Veltharian landing sites. They caused earthquakes that swallowed entire military installations. They even redirected hurricanes and tornadoes to attack specific targets with surgical precision. Earth itself was fighting alongside its children against the invaders. The humans poisoned water supplies with compounds that were completely harmless to their own biology, but deadly to other species. They released modified bacteria that attacked Veltharian equipment while leaving human technology untouched. They had weaponized their entire ecosystem against anyone who wasn't born on their world medical officer. Young worked desperately to treat Veltharian casualties, but Earth seemed to be actively working against her efforts to save lives. Medications that worked perfectly on other worlds had no effect here. Advanced healing technologies failed to function properly in Earth's electromagnetic environment. Even basic medical equipment was being rejected by the planet's hostile conditions. The wounded soldiers couldn't recover because their bodies were constantly fighting against Earth's atmosphere. Medical supplies couldn't be manufactured because the planet's interference disrupted molecular assembly systems. Reinforcements couldn't land safely because Earth itself was generating increasingly violent atmospheric disturbances that made space travel extremely dangerous. Intelligence Coordinator Nam Jin pieced together the final horrifying truth from captured human databases and communication intercepts. Humanity had known about the Veltharian Empire for over 200 years. They had been monitoring every conquest, studying every battle, and analyzing every weakness in the imperial military structure. The primitive signals that Earth had been broadcasting into space weren't accidental transmissions from a developing civilization. They were carefully crafted bait, designed to attract exactly the kind of military response that the Veltharians had provided. Every detail had been calculated to make Earth appear to be an easy target for conquest. Humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing for this specific invasion. They had built their entire modern civilization around the goal of destroying the Veltharian empire completely. Every human had been trained from birth to participate in this war. Every piece of technology had been designed to counter Veltharian advantages. Every strategy had been tested and refined through computer simulations. The humans weren't just defending their world. They were hunting the hunters. Every tactical decision had been made to draw more Veltharian forces to Earth where they could be eliminated permanently. The invasion had been allowed to succeed initially because the humans wanted as many enemy ships as possible. Trapped in their solar system fleet, Commander Byung-ho realized with growing horror that retreat was no longer a viable option. Long-range sensors detected massive weapon platforms emerging from behind Earth's moon and the other planets in the system. The humans had surrounded the entire solar system with hidden military installations that could destroy any ship trying to escape. What had appeared to be asteroids and space debris were actually camouflaged defense platforms armed with weapons specifically designed to penetrate Veltharian shields and armor. The humans had built a cage around their solar system, and the Veltharian fleet was trapped inside it with no way out. The prey had become the ultimate predator, and the most powerful military force in the galaxy was about to be completely destroyed by a species they had dismissed as primitive and helpless. 3 centuries of military dominance were ending in defeat at the hands of creatures that had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to kill anything that threatened them. Captain Wu Jin stood on the bridge of the last functional Veltharian vessel and watched as the final phase of humanity's trap was revealed. Ships emerged from behind Earth's moon, but these weren't the crude metal constructions the invasion force had observed during their initial reconnaissance. Humanity had hidden their true technological capabilities until the enemy was completely committed to the battle. Human starships moved with a grace and power that made Veltharian vessels look primitive by comparison. Their hulls were made from materials that seemed to absorb energy weapons rather than being damaged by them. Their own weapons fired projectiles that somehow ignored shields and defensive systems completely. The students had become the masters, and they were about to teach the galaxy a lesson about underestimating Earth. The final battle wasn't really a battle at all, it was a carefully orchestrated execution. Humanity had studied Veltharian technology so thoroughly that every weakness had been cataloged and prepared for. Human weapons seemed to have been designed specifically to counter every possible defensive measure. Their tactics anticipated every response the Veltharian commanders could make. Fighter craft that looked like simple atmospheric aircraft suddenly revealed their true capabilities as they outmaneuvered advanced space interceptors. Human pilots who had appeared to be primitive, barbarians demonstrated flying skills that surpassed anything in the known galaxy. They moved their ships in formations that should have been impossible, while executing attack patterns that defied physics. 3 centuries of military dominance ended in less than 3 hours, as Earth's defenders systematically dismantled the invasion force with surgical precision. Every Veltharian weakness was exploited perfectly. Every strength was neutralized completely. The empire that had conquered 17 star systems was being destroyed by creatures they had expected to defeat in a single day. Environmental specialist Yu Jin made the final terrifying discovery as life support systems began failing throughout what remained of the fleet. Earth's biosphere had been actively working against the invaders from the moment they had entered the atmosphere. The planet itself was either intelligent or perfectly responsive to the will of its human inhabitants. Every breath of air, every drop of water, every particle of dust had been turned into a weapon against the Veltharians. The oxygen they breathed was slowly poisoning them. The water they drank was carrying microscopic machines that attacked their internal systems. Even the dust in the air was designed to clog their equipment and corrode their armor. The humans hadn't just evolved on a hostile world, they had formed a partnership with it. Earth and humanity worked together as a single organism, dedicated to destroying anything that threatened their existence. The planet provided the resources and the humans provided the intelligence to create the most perfect killing system in the galaxy. In the end, only a handful of Veltharian survivors managed to escape Earth's solar system in damaged ships that were falling apart around them. Their once mighty empire had been reduced to a few dozen refugees fleeing in terror from a species they had tried to conquer. The galaxy would remember this day as the moment when humanity announced their presence by destroying their would-be masters. Engineers so young transmitted the final warning message to any alien civilizations that might be monitoring the battle. Earth was not a planet to be conquered or controlled. It was a graveyard of empires that had produced the ultimate apex predators. Humanity was the perfect expression of everything that made Earth dangerous, and they were now free to spread throughout the stars. The humans had learned to survive by making their world uninhabitable for anyone else. They had mastered the art of turning disadvantages into strengths and weaknesses into weapons. They had spent their entire evolutionary history preparing to fight enemies they had never met, and they had won that fight before it even began. The age of Veltharian dominance was over, and the age of humanity had begun with a lesson written in the wreckage of those who had been foolish enough to underestimate the power of a species that called the galaxy's most hostile world their home. The AI, children of Earth, had grown up, and they were ready to teach the universe what it meant to survive in a place where only the strongest could live.